Hey y'all, it's Stacy. Welcome back to the kitchen. I'm going to preface today's video by saying this one's going to be a beast because we are tackling an epic recipe. I'm going to show you how to make my chicken and sausage gumbo. Now I'm going to say too, making gumbo is a lot like making chicken and dumplings. It's a labor of love. But I'm going to show you my tips and tricks to make it easy, approachable, and where it turns out great for you every single time. So buckle up because here we go. Now, if you love my recipes, I'd love for you to like and subscribe so that way every time we post great new content, you get a notification. All right, every great gumbo starts with a great roux. Now, I'm the person that loves a really dark roux for my gumbo. It adds such depth of flavor, but attaining a dark roux can be a little complicated and a little time consuming. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start with 1 cup of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of a neutral oil like a vegetable oil or a canola oil. In a large, heavy-bottom Dutch oven here, I'm just gonna whisk those together. Now, some gumbo folks will tell you that you need to use butter for this. You can absolutely use butter, but let's talk a little bit about the basic of gumbo and kind of why I feel like butter's not a great option. The roux here is gonna do several things for our gumbo. Number 1, it's flavor. We're gonna toast this flour, get it nice and dark, and it's gonna add such a deep, rich flavor. The other thing that gumbo does is it's gonna provide some thickening power. Now, when you have a really dark gumbo, it's gonna lose some of that thickening power. So we're gonna balance that out, and I'm gonna show you what we're gonna do for that at the end. I'm gonna turn this on medium-low heat. In the process of developing this roux, we also run the risk of this scorching. When it scorches, you gotta toss it. There's nothing else that you can do to fix it. When we use something like butter that has milk solids in it, those milk solids have a lower smoke point and will burn faster than something like a neutral oil, like a vegetable oil or a canola oil. So if you want to use butter, you can absolutely do it. You're just going to have to watch this much more closely. All right, so what I did is I combined my flour and my oil, and I just whisked this together just to get it all nice and combined. But once it's combined, we're gonna switch utensils here. I like to use what's commonly known, especially in Louisiana, as a gumbo or a roux spoon. It's got a nice flat bottom, and that's important because what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this to scrape the bottom of our pot here. That way we ensure that none of that flour is getting stuck to the bottom and scorching. Here's the thing with making a roux on the stovetop. You gotta stir it pretty much constantly. Now, some folks will tell you that you can amp the heat up and make it faster, but of course, when you do that, you run the risk of this scorching because you're not operating under that lower, more easily controllable heat. My experience says that when you're making a roux over the stove, over medium to medium-low heat, it's gonna take somewhere between 30 minutes to 60 minutes, maybe even more than that. And that also depends on the color of roux that you want for your gumbo or whatever else it is that you're making. You know, when we're making gravies and things like that, a light colored or a blonde roux might be what we want. And even some folks prefer gumbo with like a medium, like a milk chocolate, maybe even colored roux. For me, I like that really dark roux, so it's gonna take some more time. So you're gonna stand here over the heat and stir pretty much constantly for quite a while. All right, as this cooks, you're gonna find that it's gonna foam up a little bit. Just keep stirring, and then the colors are gonna start changing. You're gonna start with a blonde roux, you're gonna progress to a tan roux. You know, there are lots of different names for these. Some folks call it a peanut butter, a milk chocolate, and then you're gonna get a dark chocolate or a dark colored roux. We're kinda aiming for that dark colored roux. The thing is that you're gonna be stirring here for a long time. So that really is kind of the most time-consuming, most difficult part of making a gumbo. But I've got a trick. Rather than doing this on the stovetop, we're gonna do it in the oven. Using a heavy-bottom Dutch oven skillet and the even heat of the oven, we're gonna kind of reduce the difficulty of making a roux. So what we're gonna do is I've preheated my oven to 350 degrees. We're gonna pop this in the oven. Now, let me say this. Making a roux in the oven is gonna take a lot longer than making a roux on the stove top. But for the most part, the oven method is nearly hands off. You're gonna stir this maybe 2 or 3 times. To get that nice dark roux, sometimes it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. But the best part of that is you can be doing something else. So you can be chopping your veggies, or you can be binging your favorite TV show, or whatever it is while that cooks. You're gonna stir it maybe 2 or 3 times in the oven method, but that's it. So it really takes some of the difficulty out of it and makes the process a little more approachable. So I'm just gonna pop this in the oven, and then we'll get our veggies and stuff chopped. All right, now depending on the size of your Dutch oven, you may actually have to remove one of your oven racks. And it's a whole lot easier to remove those before you heat your oven, so just think that through. All right, so after about 2 hours, our roux has gotten that nice dark brown color. And it's super, super hot. The house smells amazing. That's one of the best parts about this, is that your whole house is gonna smell just amazing. I stirred this a couple times through this. And the thing is that you want to keep in mind that you want to watch for any little black flecks to make sure that we don't scorch it, but doing the oven method is the best way to prevent that from happening. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is that in this process, once we add our aromatics to this, our roux is going to darken a little bit more. So we don't want to get it too dark in the process, and it's always better to cook it lighter than it is too dark and mess the whole thing up. Again, I have to say, a scorched roux is something you gotta toss. There's no way to come back from it, so it's easier to err on the side of caution. Now, I got this out of the oven. I'm gonna put it on my stovetop here over medium-high heat, and we're gonna add what we would commonly refer to in Louisiana cooking as the Holy Trinity. That's onions, bell pepper, and celery. I've got 3 ribs of celery that I diced. I've got 2 green bell peppers that I diced, and I have 2 large yellow onions that I've diced. Now I'm just gonna use my spoon here just to get all this combined, and you're gonna find that your roux is gonna darken a little bit, and the oil that's in that roux is gonna start cooking our vegetables here. We're gonna cook these for 8 to 10 minutes until they're wilted down and tender. You're gonna wanna stir this pretty frequently just to make sure that everything's not burning. Now while that cooks, let's talk about some of our protein here for our gumbo. We're making chicken and sausage gumbo, so let's talk about sausage. I've got about a pound of an andouille or a Cajun sausage. You can also use just like a regular smoked sausage if you want. I'm just kind of slicing this pretty thinly on the bias. What we're gonna do is we're gonna saute this in a separate skillet, get some color on it before we add it to our gumbo. Now in the process, you want to make sure that you're stirring this a few times because this roux can still burn. Now granted, we've added some additional moisture and stuff by way of the vegetables, but it can still scorch, so you want to stir this pretty frequently. All right, so after about 10 minutes, you can see that this is darkened up nicely. Our vegetables are getting translucent. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add 5 or 6 cloves of garlic that I've minced, and just give that a quick stir. Now garlic has a tendency to burn and get a bitter flavor, so we're only going to cook this for about a minute just until it's fragrant. And to this I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons of Creole seasoning. This is a measure with your heart thing. Just give that a stir. Now the other thing that we're going to be adding to this in the way of protein is chicken. You can certainly buy a rotisserie chicken and shred that up, but we also need a really great broth. You can buy really great broths, or you can make a homemade broth. What I did yesterday is I bought a whole chicken, like 5 or 6 pounds, put it in a big stock pot with some celery, some onion, covered it with water, cooked it on low, and then I just took that, shredded that up for today, and used that stock for our gumbo today. Just strain it, pop it in a container with a lid in the fridge, and that's something that you can do in advance. And that's the other thing about roux, and I'm not sure if I talked about this before, is that you can make roux in advance. Maybe even make more roux than you need. If you're using a neutral oil like a vegetable or a peanut oil, you can keep your roux in a container with a lid on the counter for weeks, maybe even longer. In the fridge, longer than that. In the freezer, even longer. You can buy some instant roux or some pre-made roux in the grocery store, and that's essentially all that it is. So if you wanted to get a head start, you could make some extra and just keep it for the next time that you were making gumbo or etouffee or something that required that dark roux base. All right, now I'm going to add, I've got about 6 cups of my chicken stock from yesterday. And this is gonna bubble up. I'm just gonna put this in. Now, the exact amount that you're gonna need is gonna vary a little bit. So always have some extra on hand just in case. I'm gonna start with about 6 cups. I'm just gonna add this in and just stir it around. Again, there's a lot of flavor here from this stock. So, you know, making sure that you have a really great starting point with that stock is a great thing to do, whether, like I said, you buy one or you make one from scratch. Because I salted that stock yesterday, I don't think we really need to add much. I'm gonna add just a touch of salt and a little pepper. And the amount that you're gonna need is gonna vary based on that stock that you have. So I'm just gonna do just a little salt and a little pepper. The other thing that you can keep in mind is if you're sensitive to those things, we're gonna add a little more salt and a little more heat based on the type of sausage that we use. So if you want to wait to season this to a little bit later, you can absolutely do that. All right, to this, I'm going to add 2 bay leaves and about a teaspoon of dried thyme. We're gonna bring this to a boil, reduce it to a simmer, and we're gonna cook this uncovered for about 45 minutes. All right, while that cooks, I've got a large skillet here over medium heat, and I'm gonna just drop my sliced sausage in here. What we're gonna do is just give this a sear, get this brown on the outside. You know, this is all about adding layers and layers of flavor. So searing this is gonna just caramelize the outside and just give us a little more flavor here. All right, after about 45 minutes, you can see our vegetables are nice and tender. Some of them have even started dissolving completely. And we cook this uncovered because we're concentrating that flavor. Now, we may find that once we add our protein that we have to add a little extra broth there. But for now, this is kind of the consistency that we're looking for. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to transfer the sausage that I cooked. I'm gonna use a slotted spoon just so that we can leave that excess grease out of there. We're gonna put our sausage here in our gumbo. And I've got about 6 cups of shredded cooked chicken. Now, like I was saying before, this can be from a 5 to 6 pound chicken that you cook a day in advance and use that stock, or you can buy a rotisserie chicken and shred that up. A lot of the rotisserie chickens in the grocery store can be a little small unless you get it from like a big box place that has one of the giant chickens. You might need a couple chickens to get 6 cups. Just adding that in here and giving this a stir. Now let's talk about okra. So for me, gumbo has okra in it for a variety of different reasons. First, for flavor. I love the flavor of okra. I think it's the perfect thing for gumbo like this. The other thing is that okra is going to thicken this. And being that we talked about before that our roux is going to lose some of its thickening power as the darker it gets, we're gonna wanna thicken this up a little more. So we have a couple options. One is okra. That's what I'm gonna use here. This is about a pound of fresh okra that I've just cut the tip and the stem off and just chopped it up just like this. You can also use frozen okra here. A lot of people are turned off by the kind of slimy texture that okra often has. We're gonna cook the heck out of this. So you're not gonna necessarily notice that individually, but it will thicken this whole pot. The other thing that you can do is you can use something called filet powder. Filet powder is ground sassafras leaves. This doesn't really add much flavor because once sassafras is ground up like that, it doesn't really have a lot of flavor, but it will thicken it. The one thing that I will say about using the filet powder is that filet powder has a tendency to make gumbo stringy. And when I say that, so filet in French means spun. And if you think about spun sugar, how it kind of gets that thin, stringy texture, sometimes adding too much filet powder will cause your gumbo to get a little stringy. So the thing is that you can use all gumbo, you can use all filet, you can use a combination of both. I would just say just be a little judicial, add a little at a time until you get to the right consistency. That way you don't end up with stringy gumbo. I'm gonna give this a stir, and then we're gonna simmer this for about 30 minutes more, then we'll adjust for seasoning and be ready to serve. All right, after about 30, 45 minutes, just until that okra is kind of cooked to your liking, you're gonna wanna try to fish out those bay leaves, and then we're gonna serve this up. Now, I like to serve it with some white rice. I like to use like a converted rice because it's actually pretty common in Louisiana cooking, because par cooking it removes some of that starch, so you end up with nice individual kernels or grains of rice rather than just kind of mush. A big ladle here. You can see all those big chunks of chicken and sausage. I'm gonna serve this with a couple dashes of hot sauce, some green onion sprinkled over the top, and supper's ready. Folks, you can find this full recipe by heading over to the website, and I've got all my tips and tricks that I talked about in the video today so that you end up making a perfect pot of gumbo. I'm even showing you an illustration where you can see those different colors of roux just to make sure you get yours just right. Head over to the website, southernbite.com. There's this version and my chicken, sausage, and shrimp version that has another ingredient that I didn't include in this one that often is found in gumbo and then sometimes not too. So go check that one out. Head over to the website, southernbite.com. Y'all enjoy.